On to Chapter 6, Administrative Functions. Our first objective, explain the customer service concept in relation to the fire service. Fire and emergency service organization providers provide service to three distinct groups: internal employees, external beneficiaries, and stakeholders. And we're going to talk a little bit about each. Customer service concept is valuable to any organization. In the private sector, the bottom line is profit or loss of the business. However, in the emergency service organization, customer satisfaction and value that you bring to the community is the bottom line. The public must believe they are getting quality services for the taxes they pay. Dissatisfied public can demand change in leadership or how the service is provided. Translation: they pay your salary and they can cut our funding. To ensure a proper level of customer service, company officers should strive to meet the following objectives. First, generate productive professional relationship with customers. Implement organizational strategic plans. Form individual relationships with stakeholders within the organization, policy, and procedures. And educate personnel about the community's expectations. So when we're talking about our customer base, it's always important to define who they are and what they need. First, let's look at our internal customers, and that is your employees and members of the organization, including emergency personnel, administrative staff, and officers. And each group will have its own wants and needs that you must meet. The external deals with members of the general population within the service area who are the beneficiaries of the service we provide. The people responsible for providing the majority of funds needed to operate our organization. They are not a homogeneous group of people who have the same needs, wants, and desires. Everyone is going to change around. In terms of what they want and need. So for your internal customers, they're going to want fair compensation, reasonable benefits, position security, a rewarding experience, a safe work environment, ethical leadership, dignity that comes from respect, and feeling of being an integral part of an organization. In career and combination organizations, labor and management agreements and/or civil service process where one exists satisfies most of the tangible needs. And when we're talking about tangible needs is the monetary stuff. And we all know that can be a big issue, especially within the fire service. However, at the initial fire officer 1 level, there's not a whole lot we can do about the monetary or the tangible stuff. But what we can do is provide a good working environment in terms of leadership, organizations, and things of that nature. So our external customers, their basic needs, obviously, is for us to protect lives and property, right? Keep them free of hazards. So how are we going to gain information on these groups and really what they need? Information on needs, wants, and desires of our customers can be gathered through a passive or an active method. Organization simply waits for a customer to express a specific need, want, or desire, and this is more of the passive branch. This approach takes very little effort in terms of time or money. The problem with this approach is that it is reactive, meaning we don't do something until there's a problem. Oftentimes, it can be crisis-oriented and it can be biased or one-sided. When a customer has finally expressed an opinion, the problem may already exist and will require an immediate change. because now they're saying something and it's like bam in your face. A second, more active approach takes the initiative and seeks information on a regular basis from internal and external customers and stakeholders. This approach may be accomplished through such things as periodic meetings, surveys, and informal interviews. Especially with employees that are leaving, exit interviews I think are crucial for officers and leadership to get a pulse of what's going on in terms of our internal stakeholders. Each of these ways is based on the concept of feedback. Listening to feedback is a primary method for determining the needs, wants, and desires of any of the three groups of customers. Company officers may be involved in collecting of information and using the feedback approach. Meetings allow customers to be involved in the decision-making process. Meetings really benefit an organization. So you may be asked as a company officer to go to community events or homeowners association meetings and just kind of listen or take part of, especially if it's in your response area, and just get the pulse and needs and see if the individuals there are getting their needs met or what more they think we can do. Because remember, we work for the taxpayers. We're there to serve them, whether it be helping somebody off the floor or cutting a tree out of the roadway or putting a fire out. So let's look at surveys. I do think surveys are a great way for an organization to get information. And it can be something as simple as, mailing something out after the fact, maybe a week or so later after the crisis has been abated, and just see how they felt things went. Gathering information on customers and their needs, wants, and desires is only the beginning of the customer service process. Those needs, wants, and desires must be analyzed to determine any operational change suggestions that may need to be done, and any physical actual requirements and course priorities. Service delivery monitoring. To determine success or failure of any of the changes in service, an organization must monitor the outcomes of the change. Monitoring outcomes over the life of the change, usually at specific periods, such as monthly, semi-annually, and annually or quarterly. Meetings, interviews, and surveys are used to monitor the changes. When feedback indicates needs are being adequately and effectively met, monitoring will be used to determine whether the change over time requires any alteration in the service level for the future. Learning Objective 2. Describe the function of policies and procedures in the form of administrative duties. Policies and procedures. Written policies and procedures are essential for efficient and effective operation of any fire department and emergency service organizations. Document organizations' expectations are based on its organizational model and strategic and operational plans. Organizations may use the following methods to ensure policies and procedures are fully understood and complied with, such as distributing them in written and electronic format, posting in a conspicuous place in all facilities, verify if personnel have received the communication. And these things are also known as standard operating procedures, excuse me, SOPs, or standing operating guidelines, SOGs. Administrative policies and procedures and policies and procedures are all different names. But they must contain similar stuff. It must contain information that is current and appropriate. The organization should have an established process to evaluate the need for creating new policies and procedures, and of course revising existing ones. I know we talked a little bit about this in the last chapter, so we're just going to kind of rehash it real quick. Of course, you got to make sure they are continuously monitored for effectiveness, and they must explain the organizational policy and procedures to your subordinates and new employees as part of their training. It's hard to have a new employee come in and hold them accountable to the rules that they're not familiar with. Whenever company officers learn of new relevant laws or regulations from any level of government, they have the obligation to inform superiors about it, and help determines if new organizations, policies, and procedures are needed to comply with these practices and legislations. Of course, in some jurisdictions, accepted practices that deviate from written policies or procedures may legally become a policy or a procedure. So in short, let's say that you have a procedure that says no swap time is permitted, meaning swapping shifts. However, everyone does it anyway in lieu of that procedure. Well, legally, if it's accepted and basically known by the administration, then it can basically become a pseudo facto legal policy or procedure in the eyes of the law, so to speak. A policy is a guideline to organizational decision making. It originates with the top management and disseminates to lower levels for implementation. It aids, of course, in decision-making processes. Defined boundaries and standard administration expects the company officer members to use. So essentially, it's like a rough guideline saying, okay, you're the officer, you're the middle management, you're in charge, but make sure you stay within the spirit of this policy. They are created when formal written guidelines or criteria are needed for the operation of an organization. Of course, policies are placed and maintained, such as in physical manuals or electronic formats. Some policies, of course, are the result of government regulation. Also, I think it's kind of funny, in my career, we used to cut up that you didn't hit the pinnacle of your career until you had a policy or a procedure pseudo facto named after you. So basically, you did something or you got in trouble or something screwed up, and because you screwed up, now there's a policy named after you, as we would joke, to prevent it from happening again. All right, some policies result from appeal to management for guidance in making decisions about exceptional situations. An appeal is moved upward in an organization's hierarchy until it reaches someone who has the authority to make the decision. And of course, decision makers may write a policy for handling similar cases in the future. Company officers may make a decision in order to resolve a problem. Decisions serve as a precedence that evolve into any organizational policy. And what we're getting at here is, okay, there's a policy out there, you make a decision, or somebody screws up and it's kind of a gray area and they say it's not a good policy, so that's when that appeal comes in. But as an officer, especially at that middle management rung, you're giving some discretionary power. And then, of course, you need to be consistent and fair in administering what you can do and can't do, and do the same always. But anytime you make a decision, you're setting a precedence. And what I mean by that, it's like a court case. Oh, well, you did this for Bob. Well, you better do it for me. So think about what you're doing and what you're saying before you do it, because you're going to be expected by your subordinates to continue to act that way. Of course, with any policy, you need to have some sort of formal instruction and some sort of organizational Q&A about it. All right, so let's look at policy analysis. Basically, that determines if the current policies are effective and enforceable, or if lack of policies cause problems. Often occurs when an organization is experiencing some sort of internal difficulty. And this is one of those processes that's going to take time and effort. It's like, Congress trying to pass a budget. You've got all these different stakeholders and people have ideas, and, it's just hard for people to come to agreement sometimes on things. And if that be the case, then sometimes you have to look at outside agencies or other agencies within your jurisdiction, such as human resources, or maybe you have a legal branch to try to help iron these issues out. So government laws and ordinances, and a lot of times these are these unfunded mandates that get placed upon us, and that can be federal or state. It can also be local government laws and codes. All right, policy manuals. They must be communicated through the organization when they're out there. And of course, you need to make things very clear. Written policies give members of the organizations a reference points for decision making. So I was always big with telling my officers and people below me that, I'm not so much concerned about you knowing every policy verbatim, but I want you to know, one, where to find them when the need arises, and two, how to correctly interpret them, and of course always be consistent. Procedures. Written steps to follow when conducting policies for specific recurrence and problems and situations. The officer may have input from, administration may get input from company officers about things that are going on in terms of this. And they're responsible for following and implementing these things. So they need to be consulted in of course, writing these. Now, SOPs should be consistent in reference that help all perform to the measurable standards and should reduce misunderstandings. They should be the basis for company level skills and training, and impossible to cover every situation in a standing order or SOP. So that's why a goal or a mission statement or good values are essential for an officer. Policies and procedures should be revised periodically from time to time. So let's talk about when those times are. You should have an established process, and that may apply to the decision-making model. Instances when policies and procedures should be revised should be specified as a timetable for revision, as whether it be annually or monthly, quarterly, whatever the case may be. You should go ahead and identify it when things are due and put it on the calendar, because it's very easy to overlook these policies and procedures when they need to be updated. Sometimes you have certain conditions or circumstances that come up that cause the need for revision. For example, like social media and cameras. Cameras and cell phones were not really an issue, say, 15 years ago as they are now. Sometimes you have internal and external customer service complaints, of course, and you need to address that and maybe address your policies and procedures. Maybe you have an increase in infractions in terms of people breaking a rule. So maybe we need to look at the rule and see if it needs to be changed, wherever the case may be. You may have some new technology or legal matters causing you to change your policies and or procedures. Orders and directives. These terms can be used interchangeably, but they are based on the authority delegated to the company officer, and they can be verbal or written. At an emergency incident, both are considered mandatory. Issuing orders at an emergency incident is an important company officer duty. It can aid in training and development and cooperation. Properly given orders result in the need for less supervision. And in the future, as members learn what is expected of them, you're not going to have to keep giving specific orders or whatnot. You just tell them one thing and you don't have to micromanage them because they know what you want and they're going to get it done. A company officer must control emotions when issuing orders at an emergency. Their tone and demeanor can influence the performance of the firefighters within their company. Emergency incident orders must be issued and they must be done calmly, clearly, concisely, and completely. This often requires a strong leadership and command presence. Now, another supervisor duty is involved issuing and enforcing unpopular orders. Sometimes, of course, administration establish a policy and procedure that may adversely affect firefighters. And it falls on the company officer to implement and enforce these orders. To develop support for an unpopular order, company officers should find out why the order was issued. The chief officer do not issue orders frivolously, and they must have a good reason for doing so. And company officers should make every effort to find out what those reasons are so they can explain the necessity for the order and answer questions subordinates may have. Because remember, you're the front line, you're the face of management, so your guys and gals are going to come to you and say, hey, this is BS, what's going on? And they look to you to have the answers. And you are now face of the organization, so you don't want to criticize the organization. You want to find out why and understand and explain. Now, you may have a legitimate gripe or a bitch. However, you don't bitch down. You don't complain to your subordinates. You bitch up to your supervisor and go from there. So, for example, in an activity, you've got, for this chapter, I want you to come up, of course, with an SOP because the fire chief has ordered, like, I want to say, was it mandatory physical fitness test, annual physical fitness test. And it's quite possible you may have some folks that are a little out of shape and they may get a little gruff saying that, hey, you know what, if I don't get in shape, am I going to lose my job? And that's unfair, et cetera, et cetera. So think about all these things we just went over and how you can implement that and iron out the wrinkles before they really get bad. Objective number 3, identify the budget process. The budget refers to a narrow financial budget listing, and it basically has proposed expenditures and expected revenue sources coming in. And we'll go a little more in detail in this here in a minute. But first, where do we get our money from? And that is taxes, fees, sometimes fundraising events, private and corporate donations, and grants. A company officer must be able to prepare a budget request to obtain the items needed to operate a company. And of course, sometimes at the initial level, depending on the size of your department, you may be solely in charge of said station, and they expect you to order supplies or keep the station going or whatever the case may be. And you need to be able to know how to do this legally, so to speak, in terms of the government and a budget. So you need to understand the types of budget and the revenue sources available within your jurisdiction and the steps of the budget process. And we're going to go through this. Historically, company officers have not had a direct control over the budget allotted at the company level, but an increased number of jurisdictions have assigned budgetary responsibilities to your company officers. Basically, when the budget crisis hit, we had to do more with less. So in order to do that, it's a good idea to get input on the folks who use the stuff on a daily basis. Excuse me. So that can reduce delays in performing maintenance and obtaining items, and of course provide experience in making budgetary making decisions. So moving forward, there are basic two budgets that you look at every year. And in the fire service and government, what we have is a line item budget that we traditionally use. And this line items are basically broken down into capital budget items and operational budget items. Capital budget items are big ticket items that you don't buy every year. For example, like a fax machine or a fire truck, maybe a fire station, maybe a batch of turnout gear, wherever the case may be. And that's considered a capital item. And with these capital items, you're going to have to, of course, justify them and why we need these things. And, the days of saying houses are going to burn and kids are going to die are kind of over in terms of being able to get what we need by just spouting that off. With budgets getting tighter, administration and taxpayers looking at every penny, they want you to justify, okay, why are we buying a new fire truck when we've already got one? Well, they want you to show that, okay, we have a fire truck that's 30 years old and we spent XYZ amount on repairs. So we're spending more on repairs annually than it would be to just replace it with a new something. So that's kind of how the capital budget works. The operational budget is a little different. The operational budget, again, is a line item budget, but it's broken down into such things as salary, benefits, utilities, office supplies, things of that nature. Everything, training, gets a line item, and then each line item is allotted so much money. And the way they do this is each line item has a number or dollar amount, and that makes up a whole list of things in that line item that people propose to do for that coming budget year. So it could say, well, for training, we want to buy a new rescue mannequin that's going to cost $2,000. We want to send 10 people to the FDIC conference, which is going to cost, $5,000, and so forth and so on. And then that comes up to be a total number. Now, when we're looking at this line item, it's basically going to go through this process. So we were kind of talking about the whole first planning stage. You look at what you want to do. You get directions from the powers to be, you start making a plan, then you're going to, of course, begin to prepare your budget. In the planning phase, you're looking at, of course, your tax projections, expected grants, looking at all the money you're going to get. And then in the preparation phase, the estimated revenue, of course, is translated into priorities, meaning this is what we're going to get, so what do we have to get done? So again, that goes back to that whole justification. And it takes into account types of spending like fixed costs and discretionary emergency funds. So everybody gets a slice of the pie here. And in order to get that pie, you got to justify what's more important than others. Now, after the budget is prepared and approved, then of course it gets implemented and it should get published, and then you start going through and buying and doing things. Now, most of the time, even though you had all these great ideas for your line items, It's up to the powers to be, of course, to monitor and evaluate and disseminate. So a lot of times they changed priority. So there are certain things that are kind of discretionary. And I'm not talking about salaries. Salaries and benefits are what they are. But let's say you have training, and training got $5,000 to operate for the year. Well, you can essentially, being the chief, pull away that $5,000, even though you had all this great justifications, and use that money elsewhere to help fund, say, a new fire truck or maintenance or unforeseen. We blew a transmission on the brush truck and we need to fix it. So that kind of gives you an idea how things can get revised and changed in terms of monitoring and evaluating a budget. Objective number 4, define the roles of records, management, and administrative duties. Records management is the systematic control of records to ensure quick access to information. And we need that information, of course, to justify our budgets and possibly defend against other things. They may perform actions such as operate efficiency and effectively, prepare short and medium and long range plans based, of course, off these records, meet legal requirements, meet internal and external customer stakeholders' expectations, identify safeguards of historically important records, and of course assign tasks and identify responsible parties. Company officers have specific responsibilities when it comes to records management. Usually generating raw data and creating reports can be a possibility. So you do the reports, and then later on, administration may want to know, okay, well, how many fires did you run for the year? How many EMS calls? How much toilet paper did you use? Whatever the case may be. So that's how we get into that whole analyzing of information. And of course, as a company officer, you want to strive for accuracy in the collection of the data in the reports. You can put anything into the computer, but if you don't put it in correctly in terms of being accurate, what you're going to get out is going to be less than stellar. So the old adage, crap in, crap out. So put good stuff in so you can get good information out to make the decision or answer the questions. Of course, record management covers a whole lot of topics, such as budgets. What did you spend on what? Inventory. What do you have at your station? Maintenance records, and of course, activity and incident reports. Now, something that you really need to keep in mind, and when you're looking at reports and records as a whole, there are some things that you are able to access under that Freedom of Information Act. And there are some things that people aren't able to access. And of course, there are things that you write down that the individual or the employee also has access to. So all personnel records are confidential except for attendance logs. Basically, were you there or not? So in terms of performance records, training, medical issues and exposures. And actually, if you look at it, when you're looking at medical and exposure things, the fire department is supposed to hold on to these records for the life of the employee, basically, as long as they work there plus 30 years. In case, heaven forbid, something along the line would come up and you develop some sort of cancer or whatever the case may be. In this day and age of computers, our records have gone from logbooks and notebooks to basically the computer-based system. And you may have such records on the internet or the intranet, and it's important to know the difference, where the intranet is more of an internal thing, just accessing documents and records for your internal customers only. The internet is more that whole World Wide Web stuff. Privacy versus public access. As a company officer, it's important that you're aware of the difference and be familiar with the laws that regulate privacy and public access of data. Privacy are confidential files that include personnel files. Individual training records may be considered personal employment file requiring limited access, meaning that training records are limited to maybe the training officer and the employee, and the supervisor aren't allowed to see what they made on a test without the employee's permission. Policies must be in place to limit the access only to people that have the legal right to know. Now, public access includes organizational records other than individual personal files, often defined by open meeting laws or open record acts. Some records are available to individuals who own individual properties in terms of an incident. So that would be like, I want a fire report that occurred at my house on such and such date. So that's an example of a private / kind of public record. Other records that are public access, I've said this before, is emails. Be careful what you write down in an email, because that is a matter of public record. If someone chooses, they can request that information. Kind of like salary. Salary and compensation for a job and an individual is a matter of public record. Alright, so let's summarize this chapter. Understanding the needs of internal and external customer service ensures that the fire department is held in high regards. Several influences help to create and implement administrative policy, procedures, and budgets for which company officers will be responsible for. Company officers must aid in accurately and gaining information and managing systems that contain both private and public records. Translation, make sure you know where they are, you do good reports, you get them in, and make sure they can be disseminated out when necessary. Alright, so if you have any questions, email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu, or you can call me in the office at 706-357-0162. Till next time, you guys have a wonderful day.